Horror franchises have been getting video game adaptations for decades now, going all the way back to 1982 with ASC2 Corporation's Nostromo, which was inspired by Ridley Scott's 1979 classic Alien. More notable entries across the years being a Texas Chainsaw Massacre game and a Halloween game, both in 1982, which were actually made by the same company, Wizard Games. The games were so graphic and gory that retailers refused to sell it. And that led Wizard Games into bankruptcy. Since they were going bankrupt, they couldn't even afford to put a label on the Halloween game. They just put a white piece of tape on the cartridge and write Halloween on it in permanent marker. And this, of course, led to even more stores rejecting copies of the game. Horror games based on movies never really got over that bump in the 80s. There were a few cool ones here and there like Evil Dead Regeneration and the Alien vs Predator games, but horror movie games weren't the top dogs, especially when you started getting games that took ideas from those movies and put their own original twist on it. You of course had games like Resident Evil being inspired by classic George Romero films, and later Silent Hill using similar themes to Jacob's Ladder. You really didn't need a shitty shovelware horror movie game when you had some of the greatest horror games of all time on the same system. Over time, gaming started to evolve, and around the mid-2010s, we started to see a boom in one particular genre, the asymmetrical multiplayer game. If you're on this video, you probably know what an asym game is, but if you happen to be uninformed, an asymmetrical multiplayer game is this idea where there's one side that's usually just one person who should have a lot of power to take out the other side that consists of more players that are weaker on their own and need to work together to defeat the threat or else they're screwed. This was a concept that always intrigued me from the moment I heard about it in a 2014 Game Informer magazine about Evolve. Does anyone else miss getting those in the mail all the time? Damn. I don't know, it's just nostalgic. Evolve was the first game to really push this concept to the mainstream. There were 4 players called the Hunters who were tasked with taking out one giant monster the other player was controlling, who was supposed to run around the map and eat wildlife in order to evolve and take out the Hunters. The game was reviewed pretty positively by critics with a 9 out of 10 from IGN, but it's IGN, that doesn't mean anything, and a 77 on Metacritic. But the game was heavily criticized by players and especially Angry Joe for its horrible monetization practices and lack of content on launch.
Hey, it's absolutely no surprise to me then that the publisher has so aggressively front-loaded the marketing of Evolve. Oh my god, it's almost as if they knew full well it's running on borrowed time, and it has less than a shelf life than even Titanfall did. I mean, why else is it so jam-packed with this much DLC? Just asking for all of the money up front for the season pass, the unlocks, a 5th monster, an insane amount of cosmetic DLC from the start without even earning it. To me, that tells me they know what we know, and we're squeezing as much money from people as early as possible before things settled in.
While Evolve was one of the first mainstream asym games, it wasn't really a horror game since you had a lot of power as the Hunters. The first horror game to really take advantage of the asymmetrical gameplay in a horror space was Damned, a 2014 game where 4 survivors are thrown into a very dark map and tasked to find keys, flashlights, and do little puzzles to escape, all while being stalked by a monster setting up traps on objects that, once activated, allowed it to be manifested into the material world and attack survivors. Damned had mostly positive reviews on Steam, being praised for its atmosphere and tense gameplay, but the game never really did a good job of telling you what to do, and I think that's what partly led to its downfall not even a year later. By 2016, Damned was made completely irrelevant by a little-known game called Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight was a massive success for French-Canadian developer Behavior Interactive, selling over 1 million copies in just 2 months. While the game had many issues at launch, like its reliance on peer-to-peer hosting, it managed to retain its player base purely on its addicting gameplay loop and Behavior's ability to put out new content fast, with its first DLC, Killer and Survivor, coming just 2 months after launch. And just another 2 months later, the next DLC they dropped changed the course for Dead by Daylight and the future of asymmetrical horror games as a whole. The Halloween DLC dropped for DBD on October 24th, 2016, and garnered even more attention and players to DBD. This is actually when I first got into the game. I was aware of it before, but at the time I had a really shitty laptop that I knew couldn't run the game. But when I saw Michael Myers was in there, I didn't care. And I got it anyways, and I played it on 20 FPS and had the time of my life. The DLC did exactly what it was supposed to do and brought so many new players to the game, and also showed horror IP owners that there was money in lending out their licenses to Behavior, which led to even more iconic franchises being added to the game, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Saw, all coming out in succession not even a year later. This also showed IP owners that there was money in the asymmetrical horror genre in general. In early 2015, a studio named IllFonic was working on their own asymmetrical horror game called Slasher Volume 1 Summer Camp. Later in 2015, the director of the first Friday the 13th movie, and Jason X, Sean S. Cunningham, came to IllFonic with admiration for their project and noticed their passion for the Friday the 13th franchise and let them use the license for their game. On October 13th, 2015, it was announced that Slasher Volume 1 Summer Camp was now officially Friday the 13th The Game, which was obviously a lot more marketable. After multiple pushbacks, Friday the 13th The Game finally released on May 26, 2017 and garnered mixed reviews, with many criticizing its egregious bugs but praising that the fun to be had with the game was well worth it. F13 was the first ASIM game to really compete with Dead by Daylight, with a huge benefit to it releasing on PC as well as consoles, while DBD was still just a PC exclusive, although it would get a console release just a month later. Friday the 13th was pretty huge on launch and actually seemed to rival DBD for a bit with pretty consistent content drops, but that all changed on June 11, 2018 when publisher Gun Media announced that all their future content would be cancelled due to the rights dispute going on between Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller, which is a long story that I'll hopefully cover soon. So basically, Friday the 13th The Game was fucked and lost all the momentum it had because of it. While the game remained somewhat active for a while, the lack of content couldn't keep players engaged, and DBD remained on top with no chance of being dethroned. By 2018, Dead by Daylight had enough franchises to make any horror fan giddy, and with even more licenses being added, DBD managed to keep its stranglehold on the genre. A few games here and there were being hyped up to be DBD killers, like Video Horror Society and Identity V, but they would quickly fade to irrelevance, whether it was due to lack of content, lack of trying, or even just a lack of recognizable IP. The 2020s has already had numerous attempts of horror franchises trying to break out into the asymmetrical genre, with most of them falling to the same fate. The first major one being IllFonic's return to the genre with 2020's Predator Hunting Grounds. Hunting Ground took more pages from Evolve than DBD, in this case being an FPS shooter where a fire squad of 4 members are out in the jungle and have to do side objectives like taking out enemy NPC soldiers, all while another person is playing as the Predator, trying to take out all the other fire squad members. Hunting Grounds got mixed reviews that lean more towards negative than positive, with many just calling it bland and boring, with very outdated graphics, upset with the lack of content, and people already struggling to find matches just a few weeks after launch. 2022 saw our next horror franchise trying to make a splash into the asym genre, with this one looking wildly different from a lot of other games in the genre. Saber Interactive's Evil Dead set itself apart from other asyms by combining the popular battle royale trend with an asym aspect where 4 players are dropped into a huge map tasked with running around and finding specific items to help you take out the Deadites, all while looting every nook and cranny for any gear you could get your hands on. Playing as a Deadite was almost similar to your role in an RTS game, where you have to collect points and spawn demons to annoy the survivors. You could also do other things like make cars and trees go gorilla mode and even possess a survivor and beat the shit out of their teammates. This game also got mixed reviews, but this time more towards the positive side, praising its detailed environments and its obvious love and respect towards the franchise, but with many once again complaining about the lack of content on launch. Are you seeing a pattern here? Evil Dead inevitably couldn't hold a player base either. By the time I finally got it, about 6 months later, the servers were pretty much dead, with it taking up to 10 minutes to find a match. When I finally would load in, there's some kid screaming the N-word into his mic, so it really wasn't that appealing. By 2023, Saber announced that they were already cutting off support for the game, and it fell to the wayside like every other asym game. The last major game I want to talk about is 2023's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, published by F13 publisher Gun Interactive and developed by Sumo Nottingham. Nottingham? I don't know. This game's twist on the asym genre is by making it a 4v3, with 4 players as the victims and 3 players as one of the members of the Sawyer family. TCM was being hyped up by the community as another DBD killer, but this time it was actually believable to a lot of people. Not me though. Many players were fed up with DBD by this point, with a couple controversial killer drops in a row and a meta that made the game unenjoyable to many players. But then came the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. On May 25th, a technical test for Texas Chainsaw dropped, and this game looked to be the perfect rival to DBD. The victim gameplay was more engaging than just sitting on a generator, having multiple ways you could choose to escape, and less dependence on your teammates to get out. The family gameplay was the most appealing part to many players because now you could finally play killer with your friends. The technical test brought a lot of hype to the game, and people couldn't wait to get more of it on launch day. And launch day finally came on August 18th, 2023. Texas Chainsaw Massacre released to generally favorable reviews, with many praising the atmosphere and aesthetic it took from the original movie, but it was criticized heavily for its worthless tutorial, lack of depth in the gameplay, and long wait times for lobbies. Those last 2 reasons are why I believe this game fell off hard and fast. There wasn't much skill expression in the game. The way you chase a victim or run away from the family doesn't really change after your first few hours of playing, and the main hurdle to get over gameplay-wise was just map knowledge, and once you gained that, the game started to get stale, especially when you had to wait 5 to 10 minutes just to get into a lobby, sometimes even longer. There was a bug for a while when just one person would leave the pre-game lobby, the game wouldn't be able to find another player, so you would just sit in the lobby for 5 minutes until it sent you to a new one. Many people would just leave when they couldn't get the character they wanted, so this led to that happening even more. Then just a few weeks later, they had to turn off crossplay, so PC players were stuck on their master race island all alone. The game already feels like it's on life support now. While they are releasing DLC pretty consistently, it still takes forever to find a lobby. And when you finally do get into a match, there's like a 60% chance one of the players are just gonna disconnect anyways. I wouldn't say Texas Chainsaw is dead yet, but I don't think it's really gonna last that much longer, especially with an IP as limited as the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. They don't even have the rights to any of the sequels, so we're already at a point where there's more original killers made for the game than there are from the movie. At this point, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the last major IP to get an asymmetrical adaptation. Unless you want to count that Puppet Master game or Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which I still can't believe they actually made a game out of. Most people I've talked to don't even know Killer Clowns is a movie. From what I've seen though, Killer Clowns looks like a fun way to kill a couple hours, but nothing more than that. It looks really janky and outdated, and there's just no fucking way a Killer Clowns from Outer Space game is gonna have a lifespan longer than a few months. So with all that history out the way, it's finally time to get to the point of the video. Why did all these major horror franchises that got an asim game die so quickly? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. Many of these games dropped with a lack of content that led to the game getting stale really fast. The devs would promise to release more content, but by the time they would, it was too little too late. They released these half-baked games and then just planned to finish it later by adding more content to finally have a full game. But that's the problem. People don't want to play a half-finished game because they have tons of other games they have to complete battle passes for or rank up in for the season. So if you're not delivering on good content, I'm gonna play other shit. But the absolute biggest problem with the asim games is that Dead by Daylight exists. Why would I play an Evil Dead game when I could just play as Ash in Dead by Daylight? Why would I play a Texas Chainsaw Massacre game when I could just play as Leatherface in Dead by Daylight? Why would I play a fucking Killer Clowns game when I could play as a Killer Clown in Dead by Daylight? If you're a new player trying to get into an asim game, yeah, you could play the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, or you could play the game that has Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, Amanda from Saw, Pinhead, Nemesis, Wesker, Sadako, Pyramid Head, Xenomorph, Chucky, Ghostface, or even fucking Nicolas Cage. Tell me which one sounds more appealing. Now, I'm not saying no one should ever make another asymmetrical game again. What I'm saying is that you actually have to fucking try. The problem with horror franchise asim games is that they're half-baked on release and based off one IP that's more than likely already in Dead by Daylight. So right off the bat, that makes it uninteresting. Dead by Daylight has been out for 8 years now. With over 30 DLC expansions, players have a sunk cost fallacy in the game, which basically means you've spent so much time and probably even money on this game that you can't even abandon it. So it's going to be real hard to get veteran DBD players to play your game long term, and it's even harder for new players to get into your game when Dead by Daylight more than likely already has their favorite horror icon in it, along with many others and even more cool looking original characters. So how do we fix this? Well, it's easy. Or maybe not. I'm not a game developer. But instead of making these iconic horror franchises into asymmetrical multiplayer games that die in a year, we make a story-driven 8 to 10 hour single player game out of it instead. Anytime I played any of the aforementioned asim games, all I could think about was how they would just be better as a nice linear single player experience. Predator has the AVP game, so we kinda already got a taste of a good Predator game, but imagine if there was a modern Predator game where you're isolated by yourself in the jungle with a predator stalking you the whole way. You could even keep the objectives they make you do in hunting grounds, but just fit it into the story more. You're being shot at by drug lords, barely surviving shootouts, all while there's a predator on your tail. You could do some cool stealth gameplay stuff where you have to take out a base or something, but you could just kinda trick the predator into taking out some guards. Or you could just go in guns blazing and alert the predator to you, but that could also make the guards focus their attention on the monster, making them easier to take out, all while the predator's getting lighted up with bullets, making that easier to take out once the guards are gone. There's just more interesting ideas you could use, so I'm gonna keep going. The Evil Dead game already had beautiful maps and character models. You could make a really cool survival horror game trapped in a cabin in the woods, all while your best friends are going insane, fighting the demons outside, making sure you don't get possessed yourself. A Texas Chainsaw Massacre story game could be really cool too. You could even keep the core concept of the victim gameplay. You could start off in the basement where it's just Leatherface walking around. You have to sneak by to get the materials you need to get upstairs. Then once upstairs, the other family members start getting active and will start looking around for you, with Leatherface coming upstairs to help. I'm thinking of something similar to Resident Evil 7. Once you get out the house, the map opens up more, giving access to the gas station and the abandoned Hardesty mansion, both from the movie, and then you could just have Leatherface running around outside looking for you, but you could always hear his chainsaw in the background so you could judge distance. But the hitchhiker is more stealthy and he could sneak up on you. And then Cooks is like chilling at the gas station or something. I don't know what Cook would do. But obviously this is just brainstorming. I'm not making a game here. I just feel like these ideas I came up with in a few minutes are better than these shitty, borderline early access, money-hungry games. I just feel like there would be way more interesting games like these, and while they wouldn't keep making money for years and years, the asim games certainly aren't doing that, and once the servers are shut down, they're gone forever. Games like these could last forever and be praised for years. Just look at Alien Isolation. and to a way lesser extent the Blair Witch game. They took what made the movie so scary and put it in a game, which is what I think these other franchises should be doing. Freddy is my favorite horror icon, and I think you could make an amazing game with that concept, especially since people are iffy about recasting Robert Englund. You could just hire a guy that does a perfect impression and no one would give a shit. Maybe even Robert Englund would come back for that. If they announced a Nightmare on Elm Street asym game, I would still play it, but I would be incredibly disappointed. You could make a Freddy game that's as trippy, if not even more trippy than Alan Wake 2. You could be in an abandoned school or something and you have to drink energy drinks to stay awake, but if you choose to stay awake, the area is darker and harder to navigate, but you don't have Freddy on your ass. If you choose to fall asleep, the environment would be more hellish but brighter, so you wouldn't need light, and you could also gain access to new areas, but Freddy will be chasing you down the whole time, making it harder to get around. Something like that would be my dream horror game. No pun intended. Just some really trippy shit taking advantage of the dream aspect. You could even take a page out of Dream Warriors and you could give your character like special dream powers you could use to temporarily fend off Freddy. I could keep going, but I think a Nightmare on Elm Street game is just ripe for potential. So please, stop turning horror franchises into lazy cash grab asymmetrical games and start focusing more on single player driven horror games. There's so much potential with all these franchises to make a unique story experience in the gaming medium, and I would hate to see it go untapped.